Hello and a very warm welcome to Let's Talk Intrapreneurship. This is the first in a series of sessions hosted by the Royal Swedish Academy of Engineering Sciences, or EVA as it's known here in Sweden. And over the next few months we're going to be hearing from some of Sweden's biggest business leaders, and they're going to be telling us specifically about how they foster a culture of intrapreneurship and what the rest of us can learn from that as we move into the next phase of the pandemic. My name's Maddy Savage. I'll be hosting this event. As you can probably hear, I'm British. You may know that from my accent, but I'm a long-time Stockholmer and I've been reporting here on the tech, innovation and culture in Sweden for the BBC and other global media. And I'm very excited to be at Ericsson's headquarters in Kista, Stockholm suburb known for a lot of tech companies. And with me is Erik Ekudden, whose full title is Group Chief Technology Officer. So thanks very much for having us, Erik.
Well, it's great to have you here, Maddy, and welcome you to Kista, I would say the birthplace of the global mobile industry. So very welcome.
Very much so. So Ericsson probably needs very little introduction to those people watching at home, and thank you to all of you who have chosen to join us this morning. So this is a global communications giant. It's been around for almost 150 years now. Those of us who grew up in the 90s will probably remember the logo first of all from the mobile phones. But nowadays, well known for being at the forefront of AI, 5G, Internet of Things. So just quickly tell us how that fits into your day job. What do your responsibilities look like?
So I'm responsible for Ericsson's technology direction and the corporate strategy. And that really starts with working with our leading customers all around the world, but also with partners, the broader ecosystem, everything from universities to startups to VCs, to be able to create the foundation for the next technology, or the next business. And then I'm running the CTO office, and that's internally known as Group Function Technology. This is where we do our mid to long-term research, around 800 scientists. We also do architecture, open source, standardization, other things. And then I also get to start new business and new technology organizations, such as when we started on the group level, the Global AI Accelerator, which is some 300 data scientists and data engineers that are supporting the rest of the company in terms of accelerating automation and AI across the Ericsson portfolio.
Well, we'll hopefully talk about how some of those structures work and how you foster that culture later on in the conversation. But first of all, we do need to mention the pandemic. It's all around us. It's not going anywhere. So this very exciting role you've got, what has that looked like during the pandemic? How much have things changed for you day to day?
Well, many things, of course, have stayed the same. I think the business is continuing. Networks are more important than ever. We have to deliver everywhere in the world. And of course, research continues with long-term projects. But I think almost everything else has changed, of course. We are continuing to work from home. That's across the world. Everyone has the ability, I think, to work efficiently from home. So that is a big change. But it's also the change in terms of how do you interact, how do you set up meetings, and certainly meeting with partners and customers, that is a big change. And of course, it would be great to be able to get back to at least a hybrid mode, taking the learnings then from the true digital and fuse that with real meetings.
Yeah, before we went live, you were saying I'm one of the very few external guests that's been allowed inside the building to meet you during the pandemic. And we're in this studio in Ericsson's headquarters, no live audience, so it does all feel a little bit different. But let's talk intrapreneurship. That's what we are here for. Intrapreneurship rather than entrepreneurship. How do you define the concept, first of all, and why do you love it?
So intrapreneurship is really about creating the new business, but starting from something tiny or some small but valuable. And that could, of course, be technology. It could be the insights and the business idea. There's a lot of similarities, of course, to entrepreneurship in that part, but you do it in the context of a large corporation, a large company. And of course, that brings a lot of opportunities. You have muscles, you do have the opportunity to build on the strengths in what you already have. On the other hand, you have all those existing structures, all those existing products to really take into account when you are innovating, when you're taking new products to market. So I would say that that's really why it's so exciting to, as you mentioned, having been around a while, innovating continuously. In a large company like Ericsson, especially in a tech industry, a high-tech industry that's moving so fast, both on technology and on the business side, you need to reinvent your portfolio regularly. So every 5 to 10 years, we are able to build a completely new system. 5G today, as you mentioned, before that 4G, which was disrupting 3G, which was disrupting 2G. So you need to reinvent much of what you're doing on a regular basis. That's why the intrapreneurship is critical when it comes to sustaining the company and sustaining growth.
Let's talk about some concrete examples. I think Bluetooth is probably one of the most well-known, but not everyone will know that Bluetooth kind of originated with Ericsson, and now we're using it a lot, you know, for our speakers, for our phones. So just give us the backstory to that. Yeah,
maybe in Sweden it's more well-known to be an Ericsson invention, but you're right. Ericsson invented Bluetooth, and it was actually a team in Lund. Around Sven Mattisson, and they got the challenge to really cut the cord to the earphones or earplugs, now the pods, and they really had to do it with lowest possible cost and lowest possible energy consumption, so have battery operation. They succeeded, cutting edge silicon, new software to be able to do that. And then we actually made a business out of it initially. As you pointed out, we also made phones back then. But then we took the decision that this is better to become more of a world standard, so you could connect basically every phone with that. So we provided the technology into what became Bluetooth. And I would say the rest is really history. Today, I think the numbers are pretty staggering. It's some 5 billion 5G equipped things that are shipped every year. So it's sort of a massive industry around that. But it's a good example of innovation. I think the interesting thing about the team around Sven is that they continue to innovate year and year and year. So they have been a cluster of creating new things for many, many years. And some people even left the company, started their own companies in the Skåne, in the southern Sweden region, startups, taking ideas in communication, in video, in IoT. So I think there's a flourishing ecosystem around those early ideas.
Do you know how many of them were? It's quite fascinating to think that this was this little team of entrepreneurs in southern Sweden that behind this you know, huge tool that the whole world's been using now.
How many?
How many of them were in that small original team?
Oh, it was a very small team actually. It was a handful of people. Of course, it had an internal cryptic name, and it was about something that was unique, differentiated to Ericsson. But I think the technology challenges in that, they required innovation at a level that was not present in the regular cellular industry. So it was really a small team tasked with a very specific thing. You don't need big teams initially. That's why I'm really thinking about the intrapreneurship to start from something tiny, something small. But then, of course, you need to scale it. So then it became a 20-people team and 50 and so forth. Just like any big product development, you need to scale it up.
So what's the equivalent today? Who are the secret entrepreneurial teams? I know you're not going to be able to give us all of the details, but who are the entrepreneurial teams working on your next projects?
Well, I think they are so... There are so many of them, and I think this is also one of the reasons why intrapreneurships really need to start with competence, skills, innovation, culture across organizations. We have a very strong research, we have a very strong development. We are around 20% of the company or the sales is R&D, and 25% of the company is engineers in R&D. So we have plenty of innovation ideas coming up from everyone around the company. And this is, of course, very much now feeding into 5G as we are maturing 5G and taking the next step there. But it's also much in terms of how can you simplify for new use case of 5G. 5G in industries, 5G in the enterprise space, all of those things that haven't been thought of before. 5G is for both enterprises and consumers. 4G was perhaps so much more for consumers that we didn't even think of the enterprise applications. With 5G, all of the innovation now is happening both on the consumer side and then on the enterprise side. So it's across the company.
And all different teams looking at the various different possibilities. Just a reminder to those of you who are watching at home, we don't just want it to be me putting questions to Erik. You should have the chance to send in your questions using the chat function. We have had a couple of those coming through already, so thank you for those. I'm hoping that I'll be able to get some more sent to me through my tablet, but if not, we'll have someone come and pass them over during this session. We do have one question that's come in actually, which I'll send directly to you, Erik. How does entrepreneurship work then at a global company in terms of the structures and departments? You mentioned that there are different teams going on all over the company, but you've got sort of formalised things in place really to kind of ensure that this is something that's regular and part of the company culture, right?
Yeah, I think whether it's formalized altogether or it's more the culture that sits in the wall, I think that's a little bit difficult to say. But there are some basics that need to be in place. I already mentioned the innovative culture, the innovation that comes really from great people. So having the best people in the industry, of course, is a great starting point. But then you also need the management commitment, and that's both in terms of time as well as the necessary funds. So those two sort of anchor things needs to be in place. But in a large company like ours, it's really important with the culture and the glue in between as well. Because as I said, when you start these things, it's sometimes competing with an existing products. It's sometimes creating a new market where there isn't really an estimate for how big will this market opportunity be. So you need to have a way to fast track or to speed up some of this development to really take it to market. And some of that is really the trial and error methods, or creating your MVP and making sure you test it with early customers. And for that we have processes to ensure that we can actually speed up that process with the money part, with the decision part, the anchoring part, and of course be able to try on a customer base. But then when it comes to the really big innovations that leads to a new generation like 5G, of course that's a much stronger commitment on a company level, because there we are taking the investments, we are making sure that we are leading both in technology, research, standards and so forth, and that needs to create a completely new portfolio. So of course that has full attention all the way up to our board of directors. So it goes across the whole company.
So we've had a question in saying then, so as an employee, how easy it is to bring forward new ideas? If you're somebody that's sitting in your office or at home thinking, I think I've got the next idea, what would be the first steps?
Yeah, I think it frankly varies depending on where you are in the organization, and perhaps also a little bit what phase you are in when it comes to development, the products that you're responsible for today, the solutions and services that you're responsible for today. When is it a good time to really change and create new things? So from that perspective, it really varies in terms of how easy it is. But I would say in general there is an open-mindedness in terms of listening to new ideas, a curiosity in the organization. We have also for that methods in terms of bringing ideas and make them judged by various methods internally. We have a process for that. But I think that much of the strong innovation really comes from on-the-job ideas, things that you come up with in the course of your normal job. This is something that can be significantly improved, or this is something that could be done in a completely different way. So it's not the blue sky idea, it's not something that would change the complete direction of the company or the world, but it's something that really fosters this innovation culture. And when that is starting, then of course that leads to bigger and bigger ideas, and then suddenly some really great breakthrough comes up. And I think the innovations that you started to talk about, the Bluetooth could be one example, but there are many more such that really changes the direction of the company.
You've talked a lot about how to develop that culture of innovation, but not every business gets there. What are the challenges? Where do you think other businesses get wrong or hold back when it comes to this kind of risk-taking approach, really, of allowing time in the business to develop these ideas?
Well, I cannot say that I can speak for every industry and what would work there, but what I see from our situation, from Ericsson, is that when you have a strong innovation culture, meaning that you have great inventions, you have technology, foresight, you have the things that are really helping you to create something new, it sometimes leads you to a great technical solution or maybe an overcomplicated solution that doesn't really fit the market, or that doesn't really have that business rationale behind it. It's not meeting the needs that are present in the market in the near term. It could be a long-term idea, but it's really too far away from the business. So I think it's easy to get stuck in that phase. Is it a technology idea, or is it something that's ready for commercialization? Is it a business or something that could be scaled up to a business? So that, I think, is generally an issue for large companies, to make sure that you spend enough energy on creating the real business. And in many cases that requires also to work with lead customers, working with the MVP, working with things in a trial mode. But that is something that I would put extra emphasis on, because it's not going by itself, and especially if you in a large company have existing businesses that have the direction and they have the funding and they have of course a commitment from the company to be able to start something almost on the side, but still building on the strength of the rest of the company. That is really the trick, and create that next step in terms of also making a business out of it, not stay at the technology idea.
Yeah, allowing these different levels to coexist. I would like to know though, I mean, there must have been a lot of challenges here at Ericsson. You know, we've heard about the innovation. It's clear that this is a huge part of your company culture, but have there been any big setbacks or mess-ups that you've witnessed, and how have you learned from them?
Well, I think one of the classical things, it's based on what I just said, is that if you are not putting enough effort into creating a new team that is about to build the new things, if you don't give them the right conditions, but basically ask a team that is already fully loaded with the day job to really create a new business, that is not a recipe for success. You need to be able to set aside the funds and put the right team, perhaps a separate team, on that. And we have done those mistakes for sure. Perhaps for reasons of efficiency, and to be too efficient too early is one of the pitfalls here. But also because if you think that the new business is so similar to the existing one that you simply make it a part of it, then there's also a big risk with that.
And on the flip side,
that's true in our journey, just to sort of give the example there, in our journey when we moved to a completely platform-based approach. We are basically cloudifying the whole portfolio, making everything cloud native, from the core networks to the radio networks. Everything there has to be built new.
And you mentioned the structures and the intrapreneurial aspects sitting alongside existing business, but of course outside the company you've got entrepreneurs, you've got startups, potentially looking at the same technology, similar ideas, and not necessarily having to jump through the hoops of a huge organisation, potentially being able to do some things quicker. What's your relationship with startups, and how do you kind of make sure that you're ahead of the curve and they're not beating you to it?
I think this is, of course, a general thing to keep track of what's happening outside, but not only keep track of it in terms of knowing what goes on outside. It's really to work directly with startups, work with entrepreneurs that have great ideas that can be accelerated, maybe on top of the 5G network platform in our case, 5G being this innovation platform that allows entrepreneurs to build their businesses on top of it. That's a big part of how we engage with the ecosystem. Certainly here in the Nordics, but we do that around the world, and California, I think, is in a particular good place in terms to leverage this kind of innovation on top of 5G now as innovation. So I think working hand in hand with entrepreneurs, working with startups, working with VCs is a big part of how we drive the industry, but also how we innovate on our own side.
Yeah, and certainly Stockholm does have a reputation as being among the more collaborative ecosystems in the startup world. We have a few more questions from the audience, so thank you again for those of you sending them in. This one says, when you recruit new employees, how highly do you value their entrepreneurial and potentially intrapreneurial skills, and how do you test for these?
Yeah, I think at that stage it's a little bit difficult to separate between the entrepreneurial spirit and the intrapreneurial spirit, to your point there. But I think that in general, yes, it's something that is important, especially again back to a fast-moving technology industry. You need to have this idea that you always need to build new. So of course that's a big part of it. When we hire into research and development, it's also very much about being at the forefront of technology, being at the cutting edge, because that also gives you this inspiration, that gives you the innovation part of the entrepreneurial side. But then when you look across the company, not only on the technology side, of course it's important to look at the entrepreneurial spirit when it comes to building new businesses. And there I think that every business, including ours, needs to continuously look for how do you create new businesses when the business models are changing? How do you create new businesses when the whole industry is perhaps converging? In our case, IT and telecom are getting closer to each other. So you also have to look for talent, not only from universities, but from other industries that are ahead of you, making sure that you create this, if not rotation, then at least learning from across other industries. So it's a mix, I would say, of bringing this in from schools and universities, working with the partnerships, and of course also hiring from around the world, hiring from the best. This is truly a global marketplace when it comes to intrapreneurship and entrepreneurships.
So on a managerial level, what qualities would you look for, or what qualities make a successful manager that can foster intrapreneurship?
Yeah, I think you're hinting at the fact that if you have a big organization, you have many layers of management, and how do you really cut through that, or how do you make sure that it really works in a good way? And I think that managers at all levels, they have this responsibility to be open-minded when it comes to the new ideas. You already touched upon that before, and in some cases just be out of the way, making sure that doors are open and that connections are made. This glue that I mentioned, the culture, the fabric that really connects the innovations and the great business ideas with the funding and the steering at the top, that really has a role of facilitating that rather than perhaps managing it. So I think for managers that's an important role, but the role is actually more to allow this to happen, to make sure that it's fostered as part of the glue, part of the culture.
So we keep talking about culture. You also mentioned funding there, but I'm thinking a lot of people watching this will be from smaller businesses that don't have the same kind of capital as a huge global corporation like Ericsson. So they don't have the budget, they don't have the training. But for people in those companies that want to delve into intrapreneurship, to be more entrepreneurial, where can they start?
I think that there is a way to work with collaboration across the industry for smaller companies that I think generally we can do much more about, especially here in the Nordics. We can let small companies work close to large companies, build on some of the platform strengths perhaps that a larger company has, to be able to create that new innovation and new business for the smaller company. So I think there is an openness, there needs to be an openness and collaborating spirit to be able to support smaller companies. But perhaps there is also the same logic that I mentioned when it comes to letting ideas come up and of course having dedicated funding in a small company, not at the same scale, but to be able to really look at that next generation product. That's not maybe for the startups, that is completely dedicated to their initial cause. But when you get to a little bit bigger size, still a small company, partnerships with innovative big companies together with the same kind of internal culture, I think is a starting point. And I'm not seeing that to be an easy journey. I'm very aware that for many, just the digitalization journey that they're on right now is a big transformation in itself. We also have small companies and large companies, industry convergence, and of course new competitors coming up. So you need new ways of creating business and business models. But building from that strength, that nugget with the top level commitment, and then pairing that with a strong partnership could be one way to look at that.
And there's a lot of talk that the shift towards digitalization, the fact we've all had to be so agile and flexible in the pandemic, will perhaps be a boost for allowing people to think outside the box a bit more, be more entrepreneurial than they might have been in the sort of safer days before COVID.
I hope so. We are actually, and I touched upon the industry use of 5G. We started already back in 2015 with 5G for industries, and we've learned through these 5-6 years that we need to provide the open innovation platform for others to be able to innovate on. And I think those are great examples where entrepreneurs, small startups across all sectors, of course, could be in finance, could be in education, could be in health, could be in agriculture, any of those. We've done a lot of things in mining and smart manufacturing and so forth as well. To be able to really create that almost on a national level, how do you create the platform that allows these other companies to build their digitalization journey on mass market global scale solutions, so they don't have to rebuild a complete stack for themselves, and they don't have to explore all the different business models. They can get into more of a ready industry structure, and I think that is something that we would like to contribute as well. Yeah,
so returning to the Nordic concept of collaboration. I want to talk a tiny bit more about, you mentioned bringing in smart graduates, we talked a little bit about startups. What, in your view, are the advantages of working with intrapreneurship in an existing company when you're, say, straight out of college or just coming up with ideas? There'll be others that think, well, I'm going to go my own way, I'm going to get my own funding, I'm going to do this and potentially get the capital and the return on investment myself. What would you say to those want-to-be entrepreneurs about why intrapreneurship could be a better path for them, in your opinion, I'm guessing?
Yeah, first of all, I'm not sure it's either or. I think if you are entrepreneurial by spirit, you may try intrapreneurship, you may try entrepreneurship. So I made an example before in terms of people who have moved from a large company to create a startup, creating this ecosystem around them. So I'm not saying that is one or the other, but what I see as a clear advantage, clear benefit when it comes to working in a large company and working with intrapreneurship is that you can really change the world. You can do things that seem to start small, but they can scale up to a global scale. We have 8 billion smartphones, mobile phones around the world. If your technology is in all of those 8 billion devices or the networks, of course that's hugely satisfying, rewarding in terms of really changing the world. If you are into creating connectivity for children to educate themselves all around the world, remote learning, we talk much about that, XR kind of applications to be able to do distance learning, and you do that with a company like Ericsson backing that education for everyone, lowering the carbon emissions by using digital technologies like 5G instead of the classical means. Of course, that's extremely interesting if you are a graduate, if you want to sort of look at the journey of the world. But again, it's not either or. I see that this will go hand in hand, especially for a country like Sweden, bring both entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship as the strengths of the company, for competitiveness of the company, or the country, but also to really get the best people into our industry.
How much do you want to hold on to the talent then? I mean, once you've got them, if they've done a bit of entrepreneurial work, then they perhaps maybe do want to go and move around the industry or launch their own startup. And a job for life doesn't exist in the same way that it used to. But of course, I can imagine you do want to hold on to some of those employees.
Yeah, well, I think that the biggest issue when it comes to recruitment is to make sure that the smartest, the best people really move into our industry. There are so many other things, so many other industries that they could select. So of course we have to be an attractive employer. We have to make sure that things that we offer, and that's an interesting and challenging task to work with, the kind of the big changing the world purpose that I talked about. But I don't really see that as an issue to hold on to people. I think that normally, if we can offer the right conditions, we will have no issue with that. But then this almost like transformation of the rest of society, the rest of the industry, it requires people to move around. So we are of course also very proud that people that have worked long and hard for Ericsson have now taken very senior position in other companies, really taking on their journeys. Could be a digitalization journey or a change journey or an innovation journey. So I think from that point of view, we keep a very strong recruitment and inflow to the company, and some of course choose to go to other industries, other companies, and that's of course fine. And
some choose to stay. I think you've been with the company since '93, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And some have been with the company a long time. The funny thing though is that it doesn't feel like the same company. It doesn't feel like the same industry. So many things have changed since my early days, and I've been very fortunate to be able to work with the best people in the industry, in the company for sure, being able to always be at the forefront of technology and business to drive new things. And yes, there are some similarities, of course, to how the industry looked back in '93. But now we are creating this innovation, the digital platform that is impacting everything. That was not the case when we built the first mobile phones back in the early '90s. So I think you can easily have a great career, a great journey in a company like Ericsson, absolutely.
Yeah, so I guess giving people the choice and being open to people moving around in the industry. Once again, just a reminder to those of you watching from home, you can send in questions using the chat function. And we have had quite a few in, and what we will try and do, if we can't get through all of them during this session, is put them to Erik once we've switched off the live stream. And then what Eva will be doing, the Royal Swedish Academy of Engineering Sciences, is putting the longer version online for you to watch back and check in and see again. But thank you. We do appreciate those of you who are getting involved in the conversation. So back to the pandemic. We are continuing remote working, particularly you've mentioned that Ericsson is almost exclusively remote working, when a lot of companies around the world are now into more of a hybrid model. So how does that have an impact on entrepreneurship and innovation? You know, can we keep this culture of entrepreneurship long term without the physical brainstorms, the physical get-togethers that are so often helping to build on those nuggets of ideas?
I don't think so. I think we need to get back to a hybrid mode, and I think that this brainstorming, as you put it, but it's more than just the occasion when you get down and ideate and come up with new things. It's really the whole fabric of sharing, the whole fabric of finding things that you wouldn't have found. It's almost like a random process. You need to be able to tap into discussions that you wouldn't be part of if you're only in a sort of digital meeting setup. So of course, that is a risk with the current situation, and because it's going on for so long, it's also a risk to the innovation culture, and I would say to the competitiveness for the industry long term. Part of it could be to create better tools. Part of it could be to be really innovative in terms of how to work in a work from home in a hybrid mode. But I absolutely think we need to get to physical meetings, absolutely.
I mean, there has been quite a bit of research coming out recently about how this is affecting particularly younger or people at the early stages of their career. As you say, if you're in a Teams meeting or a Zooms meeting with only the people there, you miss out on the chance to see someone in the cafeteria or go and knock on somebody's door. But what are Ericsson's plans then for returning to the office, and how quickly do you see some form of hybrid working returning?
So it's a little bit different around the world because the situation is developing a little bit different, and vaccine rates are coming up, but not everywhere. But generally you could say that throughout this year we are mainly in the work from home mode, and then in local conditions we could go into more of a hybrid mode, and then during next year we see that this will be more the normal situation, work in a hybrid mode. So we have actually already worked with our managers around the organization, but also all employees to have a dialogue about what is the new way of working, what is a workplace of the future. And we worked with other leaders in the industry, including then in California that we talked about before, the big brands, in terms of what are the best ways to set this up for the mid and long term. And that's for us a change journey in terms of how the environment that we have, our offices, is going to be equipped and how we work in those in a hybrid mode. It's also about the tools, of course.
Tell us a bit about what that might look like then. Do you envisage a move away from rows of desks to something a bit different?
In a way, but I think it's also interesting to just reflect on what we have learned right now, that it is very efficient to work where everyone has an access to a meeting on equal conditions. You don't have some people in a room and others remote, and they perhaps feel a little bit left out. So it's a very, very good and efficient way of working digitally for meetings. So you can certainly continue with that in a way, but then you need space for this innovation or creating new things. You need space to interact, and you need space also for many to just think and do great work. So I think that means that we will have 3 or 4 different types of environments, a little bit different from how it is today. You can see we are sort of working also here in the Experience Center with some of those concepts. How can we support workplace by digital means? 5G is one of that tools, but it's also very much about having the environment fit for purpose. So that's going to happen during the coming year, actually, to move over to that situation.
What can we tell the audience about this space? I know not all of it's been made public yet.
No, you have
but
a sneak peek here.
I can see down below, on the floor below, lots of screens, models, interactive displays. Yeah. So is there anything you can fill us in on?
Yeah, then since we're just overlooking a robot here building a car, it's one of those cases where you see that if you use 5G, you can really cut the cost significantly. This is about robots that are connected with 5G, automated guided vehicles with 5G. It's about all those things that really gets better without the wire. And of course that will impact things that we are doing ourselves as a company. So our manufacturing, building 5G equipment in smart manufacturing, like what we're doing in our factory in US, in Louisville, it's all built with 5G technologies. 5G augmented and virtual reality glasses for inspection. It's about 5G AGVs to move around things. So it's very much about using the technology that we're building to also digitalize our own environment. But this, I think, is a little bit of a special example. We have a lot of things around here which are more also on the consumer side. Augmented virtual reality for gaming, for entertainment and so forth. And I think that's a part also of the new normal when it comes to work, to be able to use more of this consumerization of the enterprises. how can you bring the great technology advances on the consumer side, on the device side, on the consumer side, into the enterprise space.
So things like using AI for after-work drinks or for team building.
That is a perfect thing, actually, and of course it needs to improve. It's not where it needs to be quality-wise and so forth. Networks need to be strengthened to be able to have a good quality all the time. But exactly, you can start to explore use of those tools that are today confined to a gaming experience in the more normal life. Absolutely.
Great. We're going to move on to some more questions as we move towards the end of the session. But I do just want to sort of pick up on that thread of where Ericsson is going. We've touched on some of the innovations, the huge scope of 5G. But, I mean, what are you most excited about personally, and what are the sort of key things for us to keep our eyes peeled for when it comes to Ericsson?
Well, I think there is one part that is really about the technology forefront and where we're going 10 years from now with 6G and so forth. AI, as you mentioned, automation of the infrastructure, making things easy. But I think for everyone that sees Ericsson more through the lens of what you can do with new applications, what you can do in the consumer and enterprise space, I think it's good just to give a few examples of what has recently been intrapreneurial innovations in the company, and wireless office is one of those. I touched a little bit on what we can use technology for in terms of the new hybrid mode. But just imagine that you don't have to have a separate IT department, no IT department, but you anyway have great experience on your enterprise applications, and you can move around the world. Those kind of solutions and offerings, they are now being put to market. And you have other areas such as how to connect enterprises, how to connect industries with better quality than you've ever had in mobile systems before. Basically providing your virtual private 5G network and it's on the go. Those kind of solutions are also coming to market pretty soon based on new technology, new innovations, new entrepreneurships when it comes to network slicing technologies and other things. So a few of those things are pretty near term, I would say, in the coming year or years. And I think they will change the enterprise world drastically.
Yeah.
But then, since you also think a little bit more about the long term, it's really about taking the next step when it comes to wireless technologies over the coming 10 years.
Yeah. Some really exciting stuff for people to look forward to. Right, now we're going to spend the next 10 minutes then going through a whole raft of questions that I've just refreshed on my tablet here. This person says, is it a career killer to be an intrapreneur? I thought you'd sold the entrepreneurial case quite well, actually, but I suppose the worry is here perhaps being in the back room on projects that may or may not work rather than being at the forefront of main business.
Yeah, I think it unfortunately probably can be a little bit of an issue, because that's where these fundamentals need to come in. You need to have the entrepreneurial or innovation culture, you need to have the management commitment and the funding. If those are not in place, then I think it's a risky business to be an intrapreneur. It's known to be a risky business to be an entrepreneur. Of course, you have a pretty high failure rate when it comes to startups. But intrapreneurs have a similar risk of trying to sell an idea in the wrong climate or in the wrong time. And of course, that if you do that too many times, I'm sure that that's not going to help you in the career. But I think that it comes back to really seek those companies, seize those environments where there is an intrapreneurial culture that you can be part of.
Good to get some transparency on that. This one says, I'd like to know your thoughts regarding the clash between the old company and the future one, represented by intrapreneurs as small islands of right attitude with a focus on how not to have intrapreneurs as collateral damage. So I think, yeah, how do the intrapreneurs, I guess, battle with some of the older structures is, I think, what that person's asking.
Yeah, I think old is not always bad, but if old is a resistance to change, resistance to disrupt existing products or create new business models, then that kind of legacy is, of course, very, very harmful to intrapreneurship. You need to be able to cut loose from the existing, certainly challenge and disrupt the way that things have been done before. And in our own examples, it's very much about supporting and driving the new with enough focus. If you don't have focus in the new, it of course gets drowned into the existing business, which is bringing in the money today and is of course super important for the customers. The company is fully committed to it, but to create the new, you need that focus to and set aside enough resources.
Another question here, what is the role of CXO in the entrepreneurship journey?
So by that I assume the person means all the others, so a CDO or a CEO or anyone else in the leadership. I think they are very important. At the top, of course, the CEO is extremely important, and the board is very important. This is really about the strategy of the company. Is it a company strategy to reinvent itself? Is it a company strategy to be at the forefront? So that I think is of course hugely important. Then I think you have this kind of innovation and entrepreneurship across all parts of the company. I've been talking a lot about R&D and technology and solutions and products, but of course you can have innovations, you can have this culture across the people function, across the finance function, across any of the other functions in the company, and we have very strong innovation culture in those as well. So trying to reinvent the way we're doing things is of course also a part of it. So I think having the commitment, having the broad discussions about entrepreneurship in a leadership team is important.
This question, how does Ericsson identify the right ideas and people to back? So I guess we've talked about how you might go about pitching your ideas and the culture of innovation where you can suggest them, but not every idea is going to be a good one. So how do you decide?
So we have, as you touched upon before, a formalized process where you insert your ideas and you can get funding to start it and create your MVP, and then you scale up and get more money on the way. And there is a way to judge those ideas and qualify them versus the results that they are achieving.
Can you tell us any more about that?
It's called the Ericsson 1 process, and we keep it as an internal process. So this is for internal ideas and incubating things from the very early start all the way to real products in the field. And that has been ongoing for a number of years. We've done similar things over the years in the past. This is our latest, you could say, version of that. And we are creating new businesses in that, but it's a little bit too early to talk about what those businesses are right now. They are, some of the most mature ones are at the later stage there, but that's a formal process in terms of bringing ideas that could be outside of the areas that we have.
But it could be starting with sort of a paragraph of a written idea and then you're asked to develop it as the process goes on.
Yes, exactly, but it's more about doing it than to describe it. So you have actually to build it, and then you test it, and then you take the next step, and then you go up and scale it to something that is actually possible to create a product or a market entrance with. But then there is the other part, which I think is equally important for many companies, which is really to have a company dialogue at the top in terms of how to build the new strategy. And of course, a lot of these intrapreneurships, when I talk about 4G, 5G, and then 6G, they have to do with intrapreneurship that affects the whole company, the whole portfolio. So that's another way that we are very consciously, of course, taking those steps.
Loads more questions coming in, so thank you so much to everyone that's getting involved. I think this is quite a good one as we move towards wrapping things up, kind of summarising really what you've said. This question is, what 3 things would you suggest to a company that's trying to drive entrepreneurship in its organisation? Not to put you on the spot there.
Yeah, well, I think it's, if the basics are there is the innovation spirit, and there is commitment from senior management that this is important. That's probably the first thing, just to make sure that that is actually in place. And then comes how to really sort among the ideas here. What really is the best things for the company? Either a formal process like the one that I mentioned that we have internally, or simply a very committed leadership team that is working diligently with these new intrapreneurial ideas. And then, of course, to really get it off the ground, this has to do with funding and putting the right people in place. This is not about small improvements. This is about bigger changes. So, of course, the combination of hiring or finding the right people to drive it, and, of course, putting enough funds together with it, that is very important.
Okay, some really good insights there to wrap things up. We've got more questions coming in about collaborations with universities, about connections with customers. And as I mentioned, what we'll do is we'll keep Erik here for a little while after the live stream has ended, and we'll ask him some of those questions. And those of you watching will be able to go back onto EVA's website and see the fully extended version of our session. But we are heading towards 1:15, which is when we said that we'd be finishing the live stream. So I think it's basically time to say thank you very much for some great questions from the audience and some really insightful answers from you, Erik. I'd like to know if there's anything else you want to say to wrap up the conversation, or anything that you'd like to add.
No, I think this is a great topic to discuss, Maddy, and I think for Sweden not the least, collaborative spirit and really working with the ecosystem that we have here is important. But equally important, I think, is to take influence from the outside. Take the influence from, we talked a little bit about California, there are other parts around the world where you have very strong innovation culture, to really bring the best ideas. That is really a key also for entrepreneurship. So I think it's a hugely important topic, and I think it's a great time to discuss entrepreneurship.
Yeah, and I think the goal of these sessions is really to bring those of you watching at home or from the office the chance to have access to business leaders like Erik, and we'll be hearing from more organisations about their learnings over the coming couple of months. So I'll be back next month for September's session on entrepreneurship. But for now, thank you so much to all of you for joining us, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.